Welcome to Climate Channel, Climate Conversation with Quamrul Chowdury, episode 64. In this episode, we are going to have conversation on Sharm el-Sheikh Climate Conference, COP27 in Egyptian tourism city. We all know that at Glasgow COP26 last November, we had Glasgow Climate Pact. And also we moved some of the agenda items to Sharm el-Sheikh to have decision over there, like what is adaptation goal, fixing the definition of climate finance, and also revisiting national determined contribution NDCs submitted by different parties, different countries, so that we have net zero achieved as enshrined in Paris Agreement signed in 2015 in France. We know that climate is changing. Every one of us know it, and every corner of the globe is now being affected by runaway climate change. From Bangladesh to Bahamas, from Britain to South Africa, from India to Canada, from Marshall Island to the Philippines, or to the coast of Caribbean. Everywhere, people are facing the adverse impact of climatic changes, abrupt changes, and already more than 3 billion people are on the hook of adverse impacts of climate change. So how best we can take them off the hook quickly, urgently, with a Marshall Plan like investment and proper planning and implementation. Implementation of the Paris Agreement is now urgent. And what about the market mechanism, non-market mechanism, carbon pricing, carbon tax? All these needs to be hammered on. All the countries need to act on an urgent and emergency basis. Without much ado, I would now like to ask Dr. Shirley to initiate the conversation.
Okay.
Dr. Shirley.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. So I'll just tell you a little bit about what I've been doing rather than talking about the implementation. And I feel the whole carbon pricing has changed, particularly in Europe. So I'm currently working for a state company in Ireland that are funded by Ireland to support manufacturing companies in getting to net zero. So for the last year, I've been going to site, looking at the factories, looking at energy, water and material, and assessing, where could there be savings. So I'm creating action plans for each factory site and implementing that. And there's different things that I'm looking at. For example, I was in Glasgow last year where I managed to pick up COVID.
Yeah. Sorry to hear that. I know that you are infected and had to do all the work virtually.
And worse, I brought my mother and she got it as well, but she was fine.
Don't tell me.
She had no symptoms, but I got a bad cold. And I have been fortunate to be vaccinated, and I was okay.
Yeah.
And I was with family, so it was fine. But I didn't get to meet people in COP. But one of the projects I was working on there was a replacement for concrete. So I'm sure the people in the room will know that concrete is a very high carbon emitter. And a colleague of mine is working on geopolymer, which is a Portland cement replacement. So that's one of the things I'm looking at. The other thing, going back to the carbon pricing that you mentioned, Quamrul, is there's some of the companies that I'm engaged with are in the European Emission Trading Scheme, so the ETS for Europe.
Yeah.
And they're paying 82 euros a ton this year. And I have another one that is going to be paying 150 euros a ton next year. And, you know, in theory, the carbon price is still around the 30 something for trading. Yeah. But I really, what I'm speaking to people about now, so I'm mapping a framework for the polymer industry in Ireland at the minute, with the idea of, well, here's carbon and this is where it's going, and what are we going to do? So one of the other things I'm looking at as well is renewable energy, and Ireland's fairly fortunate in that we have around about 40% energy, but you know, our peak loads sometimes can get very dirty. And what I was saying on LinkedIn during the week was that, you know, in Ireland, renewable energy is clean and green and cheap.
Oh, okay.
But then when we need more, we go diesel, and it gets dirty and expensive, and we need to flatten the load. And how we need to do that is by using batteries. Is that enough?
Yeah. Okay. I'll come back to you again. Johan, what is your take?
Good morning, everybody. It's a real honor to be here sharing this space with you all. I just want to take the question just a little bit back and to talk about, you know, the overall results that we've had, you know, under climate negotiation. We've been negotiating climate for 30 years. The convention was established in 1992. And in those 30 years, we have achieved many things. We have established a system through which we can convene, we can get to agreements. However, the outcomes have not been there. You know, during these 30 years, we have double emissions. So yes, we have a Glasgow Pact. And once again, the question is that gonna be, you know, a lost promise once again? And I think that part of the failure in this process is that we need to translate or democratize the information from climate negotiations to the basis on the countries. The Paris Agreement, it's an agreement that has no teeth, because you cannot be fined or you cannot be, as a country, you know, given or persecuted if you do not fulfill your pledges. So what we need for all these accords and all these pacts that are to continue being coming from these conferences is to translate them at the basis of the countries so that they can demand their own authorities the implementation of these agreements and more ambitious outcomes on the way. Because at the end, we are not just, you know, fighting against changing the energy system. We're fighting a whole political system. We're fighting an economic system that brought us here. So the question is, how do we make people understand that click, that in order to fight climate, we need to change everything that we are and everything that we do as humans and as a society. And everybody has a role in that. But the climate conversation is often monopolized by the ministries of environment that at the end have no muscle to push for this transformation that we need. So specifically in terms of Egypt, I think that the biggest or the main focus of the conference is going to be part of the revision of those NDCs. We are not on track to cutting emissions by 45% by end of this decade. We are not on track to carbon neutrality. All estimates put temperature rise at 2.7 with the current pledges. So we need to start this democratization of knowledge and this movement building now, so that when we get to November, these governments are actually pushed by their own constituencies, because the outside pressure is not going to work. The only pressure that is going to work for them is the internal national pressure at their basis. So we need them to put pressure so that they actually present some reloaded contributions. If we fail to have reloaded contributions in track to 1.5, I think it might be, you know, like it might do some deadly harm to the climate negotiation process, because little by little, we're going to start losing the relevance of the process, because at the end, the process is not attaining the outcomes that it claims to have agreed upon in previous conferences. So I think we need to keep an eye on NDC revision, especially from the most polluting and developed nations, because developing countries are doing a lot. And just one final word on that. We also, as developing countries, need to send better representatives. My goodness, it is just, you know, part of the reason why we're failing is because we're not being represented at the high level that we need to be represented. Many developing countries are just sending representatives that are not even, you know, interested on the topic, or that are simply there just to do something else. So there is a lot of capacity development that needs to happen.
Exactly.
Otherwise, we're going to continue to be pushed around by the big powers, and I'm not going to stand for that.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Joan. I'll come back to you again, because you raised a lot of relevant points, and those points should need to answer. And also we need to develop the capacities of the global South, because many of our delegations don't send right person, those who can negotiate overnight, stay on foot, on the, say, small, say, meetings, 20 people's meeting, or say 30 people's consultation, parleys. We need those people, even say reading the text quickly, and try to have our reflections of the global South, or developing countries, underdeveloped countries, least developed countries, small island developing states, African countries, Latin American countries, Caribbean countries, Pacific countries. Those need to be articulated. Without that articulation, how can we have a fair deal? Glasgow Climate Pact, we missed a lot of things. So how best we can ensure that at Sharm el-Sheikh? It's a huge, huge challenge. Theresa, what is your take? Reflection. Theresa.
Well, the thing is, like, you know my past history, so I don't know most of the history of the rest of you all, but I have been a politician. I was Minister of Health. I was a UN ambassador in Geneva, and I know all about these negotiations. And all I'm saying to you all is that most of the time it's just a talk shop. I know it's just a talk shop. We go there. We know we don't plan to implement anything. And even if we sign a document, we know it has to go back to our parliament, and that will take a while too. So it's a nice, I call it a nice holiday for diplomats and ministers to attend. I don't have much hope for it. And I mean, some of y'all don't even know like what happens in the background. Like, I know like when Prime Minister Motley spoke, everyone was, wow, fantastic. Yes, she's finally standing up. And that was great. And it went around the world and it went viral what she said. But then when she went back home, those people who didn't like what she said worked against it, because suddenly now she was being accused of being an inefficient prime minister, and they had a vote of no confidence against her, and then she had to quickly call elections, and she won with a landslide. She won every single seat. But again, when the developing countries stand up and we speak out, they will try to keep you down. And one of the things I noticed is that most of the diplomats we have are not even trained in negotiations. The developing countries are not trained in negotiations. The developed countries send in some real tough people, okay? And that is what they do. working class, when I was there, I got my country to be VP of this and VP because I was trained in negotiation, so it was fun. Right. To me, I was an academic going and do that. But that's what you all, as you said, Juan, you need people who can stand that, who can read through, who can see all the BS business solution that they put forward. Okay, and that is what we need to do.
Okay, thank you, Therese. You have also raised very pertinent question, and we need to address those also. Emil.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for bringing both me and Scott on. Like, we've been working on climate a little more for the academic part of it the last couple of years of our studies at Roskilde University. And we just finished off a program where we took a look at climate finance for another perspective, where we looked into this new conversation of green central banking, where we all need to see that that's also a big actor when we talk adjusting the economic system. Because if we don't really get monetary policy also to some way align with fiscal policy, then there's going to be a problem. And we took a look at what was looking into one of the more progressive central banks in Sweden. And what we found out that there's a long way, like there's in the whole big banking system, there is still a lack of recognition of the climate as their issue. And they don't even, and we even did an article in the Danish newspaper on it, calling that financial risk needs to be associated with climate risk, as it's the same thing. Like, the climate situation is financial risk, both for normal people, but also for the big industries, and they need to act on it.
Okay.
And we need some more
I will come back to you again. Okay, Mil. Noriko from Japan.
Yes, hello. Actually, I have been based in Brussels for 20 years. So I have been looking both the Eastern Asia and also Europe. I just would like to share some reflection from a researcher's point of view. I understand that we are now moving from rule making to policy implementation stage. That is very good. Also, I would like to welcome the outcome of the Glasgow COP with cautious optimism, because after all, parties and the private sector managed to increase the overall ambition, although the level of ambition is not enough. That is very clear. And among all the new development, I particularly liked that the number of sectoral initiatives, including pledges and declarations, were launched alongside the COP. And I hope that this trend will continue. Now, there are two concerns from my side. One is about the coverage of NDCs. People tend to focus too much on the electricity sector, more recently on energy-intensive industries, as previous speakers mentioned. But for example, how about transport? How about emissions from the waste sector? Recently, I started looking at the circular economy development as well. And for example, in GCC countries, the Gulf Council countries, there are many interesting initiatives to reduce waste sector through recycling and the reuse of resources. I think that kind of a movement can be somehow combined with NDCs, and that could be potentially win-win, because for example, reducing plastic would certainly help reduce emissions as well.
I'll come back to you again. Okay, Noriko. Scott, what is your reflection, your take?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd probably like to contribute more of a question with the net zero as a goal. That's something I'm very, very skeptical against, and I think it allows a reduction of a lack of urgency. I think when the goal is net zero by 2050, is the sense of urgency is reduced, and I'm interested in everyone else's, the panelists' reflections on whether net zero is a tangible goal still to be worked at for the next COP, or whether it should be there should be more material indicators immediately, as opposed to a 2050 goal.
Okay, thank you. Then Lara? Lara?
Yeah, I think
what is your take? Yeah.
As a youth, I don't think that I'm particularly optimistic. I'm not going to lie. A lot of what we're feeling, and I think I speak on behalf of a large proportion of the young population at the moment, is like there's this cognitive dissonance between what is being said and what is being done. And I think we're getting really angry about not living up to promises and processes that are being discussed. And I work in food personally, and the food regime currently contributes between 25% and 37% of all global emissions. And there's very little being done on that front in terms of, it's very clear that large-scale agribusiness productions are just not sustainable moving forward, but nobody really wants to have that conversation at the moment, and they kind of will just focus on things that seem like they're easier to be tackled. But in reality, if we don't start to tackle food production systems, which Global South populations have been discussing for decades now, all the way from Latin America in the 1950s, they've been discussing this, and nobody really seems to be listening. So this is definitely something I'm quite skeptical about, but yeah, I don't know.
Thank you, Lara, for sharing your reflection. Björn.
So is that me? Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Quamrul. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today for this critical conversation on addressing climate change for present and future generation and the way forward towards COP27. So I'm from Sweden. I have a background working in the private sector, but also for the UNFCCC, but I'm currently a student researching especially the Article 6.4 of the Paris Agreement. Yeah. And I believe after COP26 and ahead of Egypt, we are going to need operationalization of Article 6, the Paris Rulebook, the Santiago Network on loss and damage, the work programs on ACE, on adaptation, and we will continue with negotiation on the loss and damage, on the finance post-2025 goal, the Coronivia work program. We will need ambition, and I think this is what many of previous speakers alluded to, an increase in the NDCs, a revised commitment from the countries ahead of COP27, but also on finance, on the phase out of coal, on fossil fuel subsidies, and the transition to renewable, and also in their long-term low-emission development strategies. We'll need a mobilization of the private sector, of civil society, of politics as a whole and a whole of society approach. And most of all, and most crucially, we will need action. The promises made at COP26, which actually brings us closer to the goal of 1.5 and 2 degrees, must now be turned into action. So to reduce emissions, as mentioned, by 45%, at least within this decade, keeping 1.5 degrees alive. So it's operationalization, negotiation, ambition, mobilization, and action. Those are the 5 key terms. And I think for Article 6, which will be a key for unlocking the potential of Article 6 or the Paris Agreement, at least in many views, I think there are some key questions to ask. One of them is, of course, with the new application of corresponding adjustments, and where all countries have their targets in their NDCs. What is actually the appetite for buyers and for sellers to utilize the new 6.4 carbon market mechanism of the Paris Agreement? And what will be the size and the impact on sustainable development in host and buyer countries in the new mechanism? And I would be also very interested in hearing the colleagues that are here today, and maybe also your perspective, Quamrul, from the LDCs on operationalizing Article 6, because this would be a key issue in the years to come and in our achievement of the Paris Agreement goals.
Okay, thank you for your reflection and 3 questions. Those are very pertinent. Amen. Amen.
Yes, thanks very much. There are 3 points I would like to make as a former government negotiator, right? And the first is what you all have been talking about, which is to put better negotiators at the table. And this is something that we have sought to do, right? So as former climate negotiators to train other negotiators from developing countries. Because if we are able to better train them, then we are not just looking at the low-hanging fruits. You know, we are able to come with better agreements. We can put together and bring together alliances and strengths, especially when we have limited resources. You know, the second point of it is the fact that as negotiators, we also know that trade-offs are made. Often trade-offs are made sometimes between the big countries, behind the scenes. And so there needs to be greater accountability in the process as well, so that others who are not necessarily in the deal-making room are able to continue to advocate for the key things which the small island developing states need, for what the LDCs needs, so that it's not just a trade-off between big countries. And then the third point is the fact that climate negotiations takes time. It's a slow process. And in the meantime, there needs to be more support to the people who are actually doing things on the ground, you know, whether it's on adaptation, loss and damage, and so forth. The emphasis needs to be in providing and amplifying their work. If we're all dependent just on the climate change process, then it would be too slow to save the islands. Thanks.
Thank you, Emin. Gleb.
Yes, hello, ladies and gentlemen. And my name is Gleb. I'm working in Moscow in the field of transport development. I'm working in the Research Scientific and Planning Institute of Moscow Transport, which belongs to Moscow government. It's a transport department. And I agree with many previous points which has already been stated. And I agree that at the political level, it's always about talkings, documents, and just words. However, I think that these conferences matter because they help to promote the idea of sustainabilization, climate changes in societies. And if it is much more difficult to get changes at the level of state, at the level of region, I think it is much more easier to get changes at the level of people, at the level of societies. For example, speaking about Moscow, it's a huge city, 12 million of people, more than the population of Sweden. What I have noticed that over the last 15 years, the number of residential buildings has increased dramatically. Huge territories were built up with tall buildings, a number of people, huge number of people. And on the other hand, the number of electricity which this building consumes has been decreasing gradually over the last 15 years, despite the fact that the number of gadgets that we use, computers, smartphones, domestic appliances, etc., has been increasing dramatically also.
Okay, thank you, Gleb. I will come back to you again. Robin.
Namaste, everyone, and thank you, Quamrul, for inviting me on this forum. Before starting on this topic, I would agree with Ms. Teresa. She rightly said, as a youth, as we can see in UN, the people only talk, but we want more action rather than talking. And currently, I have my own NGO. The NGO name is Prithvi Raksha Foundation. It's a Sanskrit word. Prithvi means earth, and Raksha means protection. So we need to protect Earth, as we all are children of Mother Earth, right? It's an individual duty of everyone. We can't blame to the government or everyone. It's our duty. So we need to work on it. So currently, so far, I'm working on the waste management. I'm trying the level best to convert the waste into energy. So we are working on a slum area. So approximately so far we have collected, you can say, 4 tons of plastic in just 3 days. So it's a big task for us, and we are working on the big project.
Yeah. Thank you, Robin. Joan.
Yes. So I think that we've had some very interesting points made throughout this first round. And I want to touch on two topics now. I want to touch on youth and corruption. So as I was mentioning in the chat, I feel that part of the genesis of this inefficiency in climate action is corruption. Money rules, and big money rules and tells politicians where to go. And you can also see this at the international level. Sometimes you can clearly see some negotiators just spouting out, you know, talking points from the big polluting industries. And sometimes that same way you see developing country negotiators, you know, putting out talking points of developed nations because they have secured, you know, some side deals, some bilateral agreement, and then they come to the convenience of developing nations and try to drift us to a side that we should not go. But then there are no capable ministerial level negotiators that can help move that conversation to the side where it should go, and then the developed countries, as usual, they win. And I fully understand what Lara was mentioning about, you know, feeling hopeless about the process, and sometimes I do. And I am very inside the process. I've been in this process since I was 22. I am now 30. Panama went to Glasgow with the youngest delegation of climate negotiators ever. The average age was 29. The average of the lead negotiators was 27. I was the chief negotiator and I was 29. So I do think that if more youth people were to get involved or were to be able to access these rooms, we will have better outcomes, because ultimately it's our generation, the one that is going to suffer the impacts of the climate crisis for longer. And 90% of the people negotiating right now will not be here to, you know, see those impacts. So there is a motivation gap. There definitely exists. And I think part of the work that I plan to do this year and next year when I finally leave this setting, because I believe I've been here for a long time, I'm going to dedicate myself to train youth leaders to, you know, democratize this information that many people don't understand. Nobody out there understands what mitigation is. You know, it's a word that we understand in this circle, but when you talk with normal human beings, they have no idea what it means. So that's the sort of things that we need to start working on, better communications.
Thank you, Juan. You are absolutely right. I have spent more than 30 years in climate negotiation, including crafting the convention, framework convention on climate change in 91, 92 in New York as a very young negotiator. Then also from COP1 to so far. So I know the nitty-gritties, the inside, and also strengths and weaknesses of our negotiators, and also the process itself. There are a lot of ups and downs, but we need to try to crack the hard nuts. But most of the time, as some of you rightly pointed out, that we just flag the low-hanging fruits, not the major ones. Always trying to sheep those in the next COPs, next conference of parties. As in Glasgow, shifted most of the items to resolve at Sharm el-Sheikh or Dubai, or say at COP29 in Eastern Europe, or say COP30. So that way we are habituated, but we need to hammer on. We need to take more concrete actions onto the ground, adaptation actions, adaptation finance, which is very important, loss and damage, how to have finance for resolving economic and non-economic climate-induced loss and damages, and also mitigation, which is of paramount importance. Ambitious NDCs, revision of NDCs, and also concrete action in terms of net zero, concrete legislation in every country, because the lofty promises won't deliver, won't help implement Paris Agreement. Dr. Shirley.
Yes, Quamrul?
Yeah, your wisdom.
Well, I suppose, like, I haven't been at the negotiation tables per se, so I know a lot of you have. I'm very much, you know, like down in the weeds, doing the digging kind of thing. So I don't know, I'll take any questions, because I know a few people were talking about the circular era. So in the EU, we have a commitment to reduce by 50% by 2030. And the way we worked the circular era program was, you know, 7% each year till we get to 2030. Yeah. So that's why we're hoping that we will we'll reach our targets by the end of the year. And we should, because we have that renewable energy that we can sort.
Okay. Therese.
Yeah, the thing is, like I said, one, as I tell my students, because now I'm back in academia, that is exactly what you said. 2050 is 30 years from now. I will be 84 years old. Most I will want to think about is whether I need to go to the bathroom or not. That's not my problem. I tell them it's theirs. And that's why they need to really come on board and take up that axe. But that is the problem, because the politicians who are making the decisions, who are leading the governments, they have, as I said in the chat, an 8 to 12-year timeline of governance. And they assume in 2050, that's another government's problem. All they need to do is make people happy now and make as much money as they can make now and move on. And that is the problem, as you're saying. The youths need to get involved. The youths need to get into government and get rid of all the old one with the old ideas who don't see it. You know, and that's why I couldn't survive in politics. Yes. Okay.
Björn.
Yes, thank you very much. I fully agree also with Jean and Therese on the importance of youth. I've myself also been working on this for quite a number of years, and especially considering that young people represent more than 40% of the world's population today. It's the largest generation of young people ever before, and we are also more connected, more knowledgeable than ever before. So of course we need to be given the right spaces, the meaningful involvement of youth, not just in the negotiations, because that's important at the international level, but what is even more important, and what has been highlighted by previous speakers, is on the local and the national levels, because that's where the action really happens. So I think all municipalities, local governments, as well as national governments need to look over their processes to see how do we meaningfully include youth in these processes. How do we ensure that we get the right perspectives from all marginalized groups in our communities so that we can make the transition happen faster? And I think also on a point which was raised before on the discussion around net zero, and I think we actually need to move beyond net zero. We need to move the discussion to net negative, because this is actually where we need to be after 2050. And of course, we need to take the actions today to reduce emissions, to start adapting to climate change, and also addressing the issue of loss and damage. But we also need to start thinking beyond, and I think we need to move the discussion from net zero to net negative. So that's another point which I think we need to raise.
You are absolutely right that we need to move from net zero to negative.
Agree on the issues that we're talking about, youth and how they should be brought in, certainly. And in fact, actually, there are other communities who are already being impacted by climate change. The fishermen, right? Depletion of fish stocks, you know, and how that's affecting their livelihoods. Farmers, you know, especially those where climate change has affected their pastoral lands. You know, these are people that we need to work with so that their voices are also being heard at the table, and not just those that have the power and the money that are able to do so. Thanks.
Okay. Emil.
Yes, I think that Björn has a lot of good talks about how we need to have a more local aspect on it. And we need to find a way that push the economic finance for green much more locally. And I think one big part of it, as I mentioned before, is on the central banks, because I think there is an undervalued part of moving like liquid asset in that point that can help development around the world, because it also which kind of obligations being bought, which country's obligation is worth something on that market. That can also help push finance around. and in general start a conversation locally where governments locally demand that central banks take a lead on pushing green obligations and making sure that we are focusing green and fairly when we do finance, so it doesn't focus on the past and people who always been benefited on it.
Thank you. Lara.
I think one thing to keep in mind is that I don't think it's entirely fair to say that people are not rising up against what is happening at the moment, because I think that that's not necessarily the case. I think we're ignoring a lot of the international political economy and power relations that result in the things that we see today. Populations all across the world have been demonstrating for decades for more climate resilient food systems is what I'm aware of, but I know that there's also other organizations and other movements. So the voices are there, but I think the question is, why are they not being heard instead of why are they not speaking up?
Thank you, Lara. And Gleb? Gleb?
Yes, and my point is that we also have to work with people, because people consume energy and they consume resources, and the way they consume resources is also a fact. Because if we cannot, for example, achieve some changes at the political level, I think that we can achieve them at the local level, at the level of people.
Okay. Noriko?
Yes.
No,
yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. I have been happy about getting more input about potential synergy between the climate change mitigation and circular economy. And second, I have been also happy about the emphasis on the local contributions. Especially, I have been looking at transport and the building sectors. One of the most difficult sectors is buildings, because this is heavily connected to the local climate. So also we have to address resilience against the adaptation challenges as well. Okay. So, and even in the EU, the building sector has been rather lagging behind. And we certainly have to scale up the action in this sector. Thank you.
Joan.
Yes, I want to touch base on the 2050 conversation that has been going on. And I think that when Paris was crafted, the idea was that a nation will set, a goal by 2050 through a long-term development strategy. And then having that goal in mind, then every cyclical period, you will provide your NDC and tell how you're getting to that goal little by little. However, that connection has not happened. So the NDCs came first before the LTS. So now the countries are sort of like trying to catch and see how they organize these two visions. And then there are other countries that even say that those two visions don't need to be aligned. So there is a lot of talk that happens, under these negotiations. But I do agree with the fact that when we talk about 2050, it feels like we're leaving the responsibility for somebody else. And I think that's why Glasgow focused so much on having that provision regarding cutting emissions by 2030, which is by the end of this decade, and making that call to revise the currently submitted pledges and ensure that they are in line with the reduction that we need by 2030 to be on track to 1.5. So that's the relation. However, it has been very, very difficult for planning ministries, economic and finance ministries to understand that and align development planning with those two visions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joan, for your very strong messages on our road to Sharm el-Sheikh COP27, COP28 in Dubai, and also COP29 in Eastern Europe at any city. So those are the messages, quite loud and clear. Dr. Shirley, what is your last message for today?
For today, I suppose this is my first time here, so it's very interesting that you've got such a global group. and we're all driving from different angles. So it's hugely interesting, and I suppose my key message always is that a vote is a vote for climate change.
Yeah. Thank you very much. From Ireland, Ireland Commission on Climate Change, Harler, our friend, who was Senior Director of UNFCCC, and we had a lot of, say, fond memories. He also joined in this conversation a couple of times. So many friends, not only from Ireland, Finland, Norway, Denmark, all those Nordic countries have joined with the rest of the world panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Then, say, Teresa, in one sentence, what is your key message?
Like I said, you will only get change by governments and the financiers who back them is if you can prove to them that the lack of change will have a direct impact on their profit and durability. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Scott, what is your one sentence message? Closing message.
Yes, I think I would completely reiterate what was just said. I think governments will have to be forced, if we're putting the choices within government, then they need to be confronted with the immediate and urgent actions that are necessitated by climate change.
Yeah, urgent actions. Yeah, to face the emergency, climate emergency. Thank you, Scott. Björn, what is your final message for today?
Thank you. My one sentence message would be for everyone, governments, corporations, civil society, and citizens to set their long-term climate targets and vision in an ambitious way and translating those in NDCs this year, in short-term targets, in action, so that we can reach the targets of the Paris Agreement. Okay. That would be the one sentence message. So thank you.
Keep the dream alive.
Yes.
1.5 degree alive.
And it's not a dream. It's not a dream. Importantly, it's not a dream. It's to save the human population from the worst impacts of climate change.
It's to face this urgent emergency. So you are absolutely right. And Emil.
Yeah, I think for me, I think I'll follow a little bit that we need to make sure that we keep governments in line and we make sure they live up to the promises they have, but also the actors they control. We need to make sure that they are in line with governments, and we need to make sure that we all have a fair treatment on it. I think that's an important point as well for the NDCs. Make sure all available economic and political tools are being used.
Yeah. Amen. Amen.
We need to help government negotiators to see that they can balance between their national interests and global responsibility. That global responsibility is the key thing. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much for your very sharp and precise message to send the rest of the world to the global village. Now, I would like to ask Fujihiro. Yeah, Noriko.
Yes, bring all the stakeholders on board and also ensure that NDCs are in line with the long-term goal.
Okay. Gleb.
Yes, my point is we have to look at the opportunities beside this problem, because I think that it will bring us only for better. It will give us all these transformations we are dreaming about at the level of industries, at the level of politics, and at the local level.
Lara, your final word.
I think all I have to say is that we are talking, we just want you to listen.
You are the most precise answer made by you. So what about our friend Juan?
I guess I would say keep speaking up, keep fighting, and do not give up. This is the right fight.
Okay. Thank you very, very much. It was a great pleasure to have you all at Climate Channel's Climate Conversation with Quamrul Chowdury, episode 64th. In this 64th episode, we have discussed plenty of issues on our road to Sharm el-Sheikh COP27 in Egypt come November, only 9 months ahead of us. We have to crack lot of hard nuts, not flagging only the low-hanging fruits. We have to revisit our NDCs. Every country, every continent, every nation has to raise its NDCs, ambitious NDCs, so that we can achieve net zero or negative, not by 2050, but much ahead of that. And also in between our short-term goals, global goals for 2025, 2030, 2035, 2040, like that. And also what about defining adaptation goal, global adaptation goal, adaptation targets, adaptation ambitions, and also national adaptation plans, not only formulation, but also implementation of those national adaptation plans. Doubling, quadrupling adaptation finance, which is a key to unlock this climate emergency. And also defining climate finance, new and additional, over and above official development assistance, and predictable finance, adequate finance, easy access, because whatever we have mobilized so far, official development assistance and predictable finance, adequate finance, easy access, because whatever we have mobilized so far, much of it is yet to be channeled onto the ground. So we need to scale that up. We need to make easy access, direct access to the recipients, not through multilateral agencies, multinationals, banks, but through the national institutions, local level institutions, so that we can strengthen local initiatives, community adaptation, community-based adaptation, local adaptation, and also mitigation in every corner of this planet to protect our planet and also our younger generation. They should be in the driving seat. They should be involved. Their participation, their ownership is of paramount importance. With that, I would now like to end this episode, 64th episode, and once again, thank you very, very much for joining this very interactive conversation. Your input are of immense importance because you are the change makers. You can help protect this planet by your contribution, your intellectual input. Our collective wisdom will help resolve quite right earnestly this climate emergency as science is loud and clear. IPCC AR6 report is loud and clear. Code red, we have to respond to. And hope that current COP presidency led by Alok Sharma and also incoming COP presidency will try their best this year so that all the hard nerves can be tackled. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, Kamal.
Yeah. Welcome to Climate Channel, Climate Conversation.